He had one rule after leaving the war behind: never pick up a weapon again. Nathan Cole kept that rule for 6 years. 6 years of grease-stained hands, school lunches packed in mismatched containers, and bedtime stories he read twice because Emma always asked for them twice. 6 years of pretending he was just a mechanic. Then one storm-soaked highway took everything he'd built and reminded him exactly what he was. If you've ever wondered what a man does when the life he's running from comes back to claim the people he loves most, stay until the end, hit like, and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The garage smelled like it always did: motor oil, rubber, and the faint chemical bite of brake fluid that never quite washed out of Nathan's hands no matter how hard he scrubbed. He'd stopped trying to get rid of it after the first year. Now it was just part of him, like the scar that curved along his left jaw, or the habit he had of checking the exits every time he walked into a room. 3 cars waited in the bay. A rusted Ford pickup that belonged to old Mr. Dempsey, who came in every 4 months pretending something was wrong, just so he'd have someone to talk to. A Honda Civic with a cracked manifold and a bumper sticker that said "World's Okayest Mom." And a Jeep that belonged to a college kid who'd driven it into a drainage ditch last weekend and seemed genuinely surprised that this was a problem. Nathan worked on the Civic first. He always started with the hardest job. He was underneath it, torque wrench in hand, when he heard the sound of small sneakers slapping against the concrete floor. "Dad." He didn't move right away, just exhaled slowly and set the wrench down on his chest. "Emma, you're supposed to be in the office doing homework." "I finished." "All of it?" A pause, the kind of pause that contained a lie being quickly reconsidered. "Most of it." He rolled out from under the car and sat up. Emma was standing at the edge of the bay in her school uniform, navy blue cardigan, white collar slightly crooked, one sock pulled higher than the other. She was 8 years old and had her mother's eyes, that particular shade of brown that looked almost amber when the light hit them a certain way. It still caught him off guard sometimes. He'd be looking at her and suddenly need to look somewhere else. "Which part isn't finished?" "Math." She wrinkled her nose. "Fractions. Fractions aren't hard." "You say that because you're old and your brain is different." Nathan almost smiled. "Sit down. I'll be there in 10 minutes. "You said 10 minutes an hour ago." "Then sit down and give me another 10. She gave him the look, the one she'd clearly inherited from no one he could identify, a look of pure, patient skepticism that no 8-year-old should have perfected, and disappeared back toward the office. He watched the doorway for a second after she was gone. Then he picked up the wrench and went back to work. That was the life Nathan Cole had constructed for himself in the 6 years since he'd left the Navy. Carefully, deliberately. The way you build something when you know exactly how fast it can fall apart. He'd chosen the town of Millhaven, Oregon, precisely because no one there had reason to notice him. Population just under 12,000. One main road, 2 traffic lights, a diner that had been open since 1987 and still served coffee in ceramic mugs with small chips in the rims. The kind of town where everyone knew your first name but didn't ask what you did before you got here. He'd bought the garage from a man named Garrett who was retiring to Arizona and couldn't be bothered to find a real buyer. The deal was informal, almost comically so. A handshake, a transfer of title, and Garrett leaving a toolbox behind that turned out to contain a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels and a photograph of a woman Nathan assumed was an ex-wife. He'd kept the toolbox, thrown out the photograph, poured the whiskey down the drain. There were people from his old life who would have called that wasteful. There were people from his old life he didn't talk to anymore. The mission that ended his career wasn't the worst thing that had ever happened to Nathan Cole. He wanted to be clear about that, in the moments when he allowed himself to think about it. He had seen genuinely worse things. He had done things, in service of objectives he believed in, that required a particular kind of internal permission that he'd had to grant himself in real time and couldn't always fully account for afterward. But that last mission, a night operation in a location he still wasn't cleared to name, even to himself, had done something to him that the others hadn't. It had made him hesitate, not in a way anyone else would have noticed, not in a way that compromised the objective or put his teammates at risk. A fraction of a second, there and gone, easily explained away as a tactical assessment pause. But he knew what it was. He'd hesitated because, in that moment, in the dark, with his hands doing what his hands had been trained to do, he had thought about Emma. She was 2 years old then. Home with her grandmother because her mother had been dead for 7 months. 2 years old, and the last image Nathan had before pulling the trigger was her face. Not even a specific moment, just her face, the general fact of her existence. And he'd had the sudden understanding that if something happened to him tonight, she would grow up without either parent. He completed the mission. He always completed the mission. He put in his papers 3 weeks later. His commanding officer, a man named Briggs, who had known Nathan for 9 years, had looked at the paperwork for a long time before looking up. "You sure?" "Yes." "Nathan, I'm sure, sir." Briggs had signed the papers. He didn't argue. Some part of Nathan had almost wanted him to. The fractions weren't actually that complicated. Nathan sat across from Emma at the small desk in the office, a desk he'd found at a thrift store and repainted badly, so there were still visible brushstrokes along one side, and walked her through them with a pencil and a piece of paper he'd torn from a receipt book. "Okay, if you have a pizza, I want pizza for dinner. Focus. If you have a pizza and you cut it into 4 pieces, can we get pizza tonight?" Emma. "Okay, 4 pieces. I'm focused." He drew a circle on the paper and divided it into quarters. "You eat 1 piece, what fraction of the pizza is gone?" She stared at it. 1/4. "Right, you eat another piece, now what?" 2/4. A pause. "Which is also 1/2. Good. See? Not hard." She looked at him with that amber-brown gaze. "It's still annoying. Most useful things are." She seemed to consider this as a life philosophy, decided it was probably accurate, and went back to her worksheet. Nathan watched her work for a moment. The way she held her pencil too tightly, same as she always had, same as her mother had, and then stood up and went to the small refrigerator in the corner to see what they had for dinner. Not pizza, as it turned out. Some leftover chicken, half a pepper, 2 eggs, and the kind of loneliness that came from being responsible for someone else's whole world and knowing every single day that you were probably getting some part of it wrong. He started on the chicken. Emma kept working at the desk behind him, occasionally muttering things under her breath that were either mathematical complaints or quiet arguments with the worksheet itself. He let her. It was the kind of noise that made the silence feel less like something that was pressing in. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all afternoon finally arrived. Rain hit the metal roof of the garage in a sound like static, and the single window in the office showed nothing but darkness and water. "Dad," Emma said, "what's the denominator again?" He turned around. "Bottom number." "Why?" "Because someone decided that a long time ago, and we're stuck with it." She accepted this. "Okay." He turned back to the chicken. But they ate at 7. Emma told him about a girl at school named Priya who had said something mean at lunch, then immediately defended Priya by explaining that Priya's parents were getting divorced, and she was probably upset. Nathan listened. He asked questions. He did not offer solutions she hadn't asked for because he had learned, slowly and at some cost, that this was what she actually needed from him. Not answers, just the experience of being heard. At 8:30, he read to her. They were working through a book about a girl who discovers a hidden world under her city. Emma had opinions about every chapter. Some of them were quite sophisticated. She fell asleep mid-sentence of chapter 11, which Nathan took as a sign that the chapter was either very good or very comfortable. He sat in the chair beside her bed for a few minutes after the light was out. The rain was still going, harder now. He had to drive out to Cooperstown in the morning for a part that had been backordered for 2 weeks. The route took him along Route 9, which cut through a stretch of highway that the locals called the Dark Mile. Not because anything had happened there, just because the trees grew close on both sides, and there weren't any lights for about 4 miles. He'd driven it 100 times. He didn't think about it much, tot. He almost didn't take Emma with him. That was the thing he'd turn over in his mind later, in the days and weeks after, when he had too much time to look for the hinge points. The moments where one small different decision would have meant a completely different night. He almost left her with Mrs. Albright from next door, who watched Emma sometimes when Nathan had an early job. But it was a Saturday, and Mrs. Albright had mentioned something about her sister visiting from Portland, and Nathan didn't like asking favors when he could avoid it. So Emma came. She was in the back seat in her puffy yellow jacket, the one she'd picked herself, which Nathan found borderline blinding but had bought anyway, with her headphones on and her tablet loaded with an animated show he'd already pre-approved. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The heater was working for once. It should have been nothing. A 40-minute drive, a parts pickup, 40 minutes back. Home before 10. They were maybe 15 minutes from Cooperstown when Emma pulled one headphone off and said, "Dad, there are lights." Nathan had already seen them, in his mirrors, far back but not as far as he'd like. A pair of headlights. Nothing unusual. Traffic existed. People drove on highways. But he'd been watching them for 3 minutes, and they hadn't gotten closer or fallen farther behind. They were keeping pace. He didn't say anything to Emma, just adjusted his grip on the wheel and kept his eyes tracking between the road ahead and the mirror. Then, around a long bend on the dark stretch of Route 9, he saw something that made his brain shift into a different gear entirely. Not panic, nothing as loose as panic, but the old, precise, calculating focus that he'd spent 6 years trying to pack away in a box and forget. Off the road, maybe 40 yards into the tree line, a vehicle was on its side. Not just off the road, over the guardrail, the metal barrier bent and torn like paper. Black luxury SUV, the kind that costs more than most people's houses. The headlights were still on, cutting crooked angles into the dark and the rain. And there were figures, moving around it, at least 3 of them, in dark clothing, moving with the kind of purposeful efficiency that did not look like people trying to help. Nathan's foot hit the brake before he'd made a conscious decision. Emma, headphones on, volume up. She looked at the scene through the window, her face serious. Is someone hurt? I don't know yet, headphones on. Dad. Emma. His voice was quiet. That was what stopped her. Not volume, just the particular flatness in his tone that she had learned, somewhere in her 8 years, meant that this was not a moment for discussion. Headphones on, don't take them off until I tell you, okay? She put them on. She kept her eyes on him. He pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, cut the engine, and sat there for exactly 4 seconds, watching the figures by the overturned vehicle. They hadn't noticed him yet. They were focused on something, or someone, inside. He reached under the seat. He kept a tire iron there, had since the first week in Millhaven. It had felt excessive at the time. Right now it felt like insufficient. He got out of the truck. The rain had picked back up. It hit his face and soaked through his jacket in the first 30 seconds. He moved toward the tree line away from the road, staying out of the headlight angles, letting the dark do what he needed it to do. The 3 figures were still focused on the vehicle. One was trying to get a door open. The other 2 were standing back, and as Nathan got closer, moving quietly across wet leaves and mud the way he'd been trained to move, he could see that they were holding something, not tools. He recalibrated. He could hear a voice now, a woman's voice coming from inside the overturned SUV. Not screaming, something worse than screaming. Steady, controlled, the voice of someone working very hard to hold it together. "You don't want to do this," she was saying. "Think about what you're doing." One of the standing figures laughed. Not a good laugh. Nathan was 12 feet away when he stopped. He assessed. 3 targets, likely armed. One priority, whoever was in that vehicle. Secondary priority, the one that moved everything else. Emma was in his truck 40 yards away. He had maybe 2 minutes before the man trying the door got it open. Less, if they decided to stop trying. He stopped thinking and started moving. What happened next took under 90 seconds. Nathan would remember it later, not as a sequence of decisions, but as something more like weather, a series of forces he was operating within rather than choosing. That was what training did when it went deep enough. It stopped feeling like skill and started feeling like reflex. The first man didn't hear him until Nathan was already there. He went down fast and quiet. Nathan caught him before he hit the ground, which was more for noise management than any other reason. The second man turned at the wrong moment, not toward Nathan, toward the tree line to his left, some animal instinct alerting him to something without telling him what. And Nathan was already inside his reach before the man could make use of whatever he'd sensed. The third man had more time. Almost enough. He got one shot off. The sound of it was enormous in the wet dark, and Nathan felt the air move past his left ear, and then he was past it, inside the moment, and the third man was on the ground with the rain coming down on all of them. Nathan stood there for a second, breathing, His hands were shaking. Not much. Not visibly, probably. But he could feel it. He turned toward the overturned SUV. The door that the first man had been working on came open, from the inside. A woman climbed out. She was moving stiffly, one hand pressed to her ribs, and she had a cut above her right eye that was bleeding in a thin line down her cheek. Her clothing was expensive, wrecked. Her hair was dark and had fallen loose from whatever it had been. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who had just watched something they couldn't yet categorize. "Are you hurt?" Nathan asked. She blinked, like the question was unexpected. She pressed harder on her ribs, which told him everything about the ribs. "I've had worse days. Probably. But specifically right now. Are you hurt?" "Yes," she said, simply. "I think so." He looked at her for a second, then he looked back at his truck. Emma was still in the back seat. He could see the yellow jacket through the rain-blurred rear window. She was still, which meant she still had the headphones on. Which meant she was doing what he'd asked. Good girl. He turned back to the woman. "Can you walk?" She straightened up, winced, did it anyway. "Yes." "Then walk with me." She looked at the three men on the ground, then back at him. Something moved through her expression that he didn't have a name for yet. "Who are you?" she said. Nathan picked up the tire iron he'd set down somewhere in the last 90 seconds. He honestly couldn't remember when. "Just a mechanic," he said. "Come on." The woman's name was Victoria Sterling, though Nathan didn't know that yet. He found out the way he found out most things in the first hour after the highway. In pieces, reluctantly offered, between long silences that she seemed to use like other people used walls. She sat in the passenger seat of his truck with her arms crossed over her ribs and her eyes tracking everything outside the window, and she answered his questions with the particular economy of someone who had learned that information was a form of currency and wasn't sure yet what he was charging. Emma had pulled one headphone off the second Nathan opened the driver's door. She'd looked at Victoria, then at Nathan, then at the three men visible through the rear window who were still on the ground in the rain. "Are they dead?" Emma asked. "No," Nathan said. "Are they bad guys?" "They made some bad choices tonight." He started the engine. Headphones back on. "Dad." "Emma." She looked at Victoria. Victoria looked back at her with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. Something between surprise and a tenderness she clearly hadn't planned on showing. Emma apparently decided the woman passed some private test because she put the headphones back on without further argument and returned to her tablet, though Nathan noticed she'd turned the volume down. She was listening. He pulled back onto Route 9 and headed away from Cooperstown. The parts pickup could wait. Everything could wait. "You need a hospital," he said. "No." Victoria's voice was flat. "Your ribs might be bruised, might be cracked. Either way, a hospital requires paperwork, and paperwork requires explaining tonight, and I'm not ready to explain tonight." He glanced at her. The cut above her eye had slowed down but not stopped. She was holding her sleeve against it with a pressure that suggested she'd done first aid on herself before. "There's a clinic in Millhaven that opens at 8, he said. "Dr. Reyes, she doesn't ask a lot of questions." "Is that from personal experience?" "Emma broke her arm 2 years ago. We were climbing a tree she wasn't supposed to be climbing." He paused. "I was in the tree too." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, just slightly. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. "Millhaven," she said. "That's where you live?" "That's where I'm taking you, unless you have somewhere else." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "I don't." He didn't ask what that meant yet. His house was on Aldermore Street, 6 blocks from the garage. It was a 2-bedroom rental with a porch that needed repainting and a yard Emma had claimed entirely for a project involving raised vegetable beds that had so far produced 3 tomatoes and a quantity of enthusiasm. Nathan had rented it furnished, stripped out most of what came with it, and replaced it with things that were functional and not much else. The couch was comfortable. The kitchen worked. The bookshelves were mostly Emma's. It was not a house that suggested a man who had a lot of plans for the future. He got Emma inside and upstairs with minimal resistance. She was tired enough that the promise of more Chapter 11 in the morning was sufficient. and then came back downstairs to find Victoria standing in the kitchen, looking at the photograph on the refrigerator. It was the only photograph he kept where people could see it. Emma, at age 4, at the coast, holding up a sand dollar with the expression of someone who had discovered something of monumental personal significance. Her socks were wet. She was delighted. "Your daughter," Victoria said. "Emma, yes. She looks like—" She stopped. "Her mother." "I know." Victoria turned. She had her arms still crossed over her ribs, but she'd taken her jacket off, and he could see the suit underneath, or what was left of it, the lapel torn, one sleeve darkened with something that might have been oil from the overturned SUV. Even wrecked, it was the kind of suit that cost more than his truck. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You didn't," he said. "Sit down. I'll find the first aid kit." She sat at the kitchen table without arguing, which told him the ribs were worse than she was letting on. Standing hurt. Sitting was a relief she didn't have the energy to pretend she didn't need. He found the kit in the cabinet above the refrigerator and brought it to the table. He'd stocked it himself. Proper gauze, medical tape, antiseptic, butterfly closures, the things that were actually useful rather than the cheap store brand version with 12 Band-Aids and a thermometer. He pulled a chair around to her side of the table and sat close enough to work on the cut. "This is going to sting," he said. "I assumed." It did. She didn't make a sound, but her jaw tightened in a way that he recognized. The particular clenching of someone absorbing pain through will alone. He worked quickly and cleanly, the way he'd been taught, and got 3 butterfly closures across the cut that would hold it until the clinic. "You've done this before," she said. Not a question. "I've had some practice." "The men on the highway." She was looking at him directly now, which was the first time she'd done it steadily. "What you did, that wasn't a mechanic." "I'm a mechanic now." "That's not what I said." He capped the antiseptic and set it back in the kit. "What I was before doesn't really matter tonight." "I think it might matter quite a bit," she said quietly, "because those men weren't random. They weren't carjackers. They knew my route. They knew my vehicle. They knew exactly where to force me off the road to make it look like an accident." Nathan looked at her. "Someone arranged this," she said. Her voice was very steady. "Someone who has access to my security schedule, my travel plans, and enough resources to hire 3 men and a vehicle and coordinate all of it on a rainy Saturday night. And you're telling me this instead of the police because I don't know who I can trust." She said it simply, without drama, which somehow made it worse. "My head of security has access to all of those things. My executive team has access. My assistant, my driver, all of them. And I spent the last 40 minutes in that ditch trying to figure out which of them put me there, and I couldn't narrow it down." The kitchen was quiet, except for the rain on the window, and the faint sound of Emma moving around upstairs, probably rearranging her bookshelf, which she did when she was processing something, had done it since she was 5. "Where's your driver?" Nathan asked. "The vehicle, was there anyone else?" Victoria's expression changed. Something went tight around her eyes. "Marcus drove me. When they forced us off the road, the impact was on his side. He was—" She stopped. Started again. "He didn't make it off the highway." Nathan didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would be useful, so he didn't try. After a moment, she said, "He had 2 kids." "I know," Nathan said, though he didn't. He said it because it was the thing she needed someone to acknowledge. Not a solution, just the weight of it confirmed. She looked at the table, then back up. "What's your name? You never told me." "Nathan Cole." "Victoria Sterling." She held out her hand across the table with a formality that was almost jarring given the circumstances, given that she was sitting at his kitchen table at 11 at night with butterfly closures on her face and a borrowed dish towel pressed against her ribs. He shook it. "I know who you are," he said. Something shifted in her expression. The faint guardedness he'd already noticed tightened a notch. "Sterling Technology," he said. "Emma did a school project on companies that make accessibility software. Your company was on the list. She was annoyed that the CEO was a woman, and the book she was using kept calling you the businesswoman instead of just the CEO." The ghost of a smile came back. This time it made it a little further. "She sounds like someone with opinions." She has approximately 412 of them at any given time. Victoria almost laughed. It turned into a wince because of the ribs, but for just a second there was something in her face that was younger than the rest of her, less armored, and then it was gone. He set her up in the spare room. It wasn't much. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the vegetable garden. But the sheets were clean because Emma had decided recently that fresh sheets were a moral matter and had begun changing them on a rotation Nathan hadn't fully decoded. He brought her water and 2 ibuprofen from the medicine cabinet and stood in the doorway while she sat on the edge of the bed. "In the morning," he said, "I'll take you to the clinic. After that, whatever you want to do. That's up to you." She looked at him for a moment. "And tonight?" "Tonight you sleep." He started to turn away. "Nathan." Her voice stopped him. He turned back. She was sitting very straight, which was probably the ribs again, the instinct to hold yourself upright when everything hurt. "Why did you stop?" "On the highway." Most people would have. She didn't finish the sentence, but he knew what it contained, kept driving, called 911 from a safe distance, not gotten out of their truck in the dark with 3 armed men and a child 40 yards behind them. He thought about how to answer that. "Emma saw the car," he said finally. "Off the road. If I'd driven past and she'd found out later what was there." He stopped, tried again. "She asked me once, after we watched some news story, what you're supposed to do when you see someone who needs help. I told her you help. That's what I told her." He paused. "I wasn't going to drive past and then have to explain why I lied." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." He said goodnight and went to check on Emma. What? Emma was asleep, finally, properly. On her side with her hand tucked under her cheek, the way she'd slept since she was a baby. Nathan stood in her doorway for a moment, listening to her breathe, and did the thing he sometimes did, which was simply confirm that she was there, present, intact. It was a habit born of the specific terror of being the only thing standing between a small person and everything that could go wrong, and he doubted he'd ever fully break it. He went downstairs, poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table. 3 men on a highway in the dark. Professional enough to know Victoria's route, careless enough to let him take them. That carelessness bothered him more than the rest of it. If someone with serious resources had arranged this, and the equipment, the coordination, the timing all pointed to serious resources, why send men who could be taken apart by a mechanic with a tire iron? Unless they hadn't known what he was. Unless the whole operation was designed to look like an accident and the men were there to make sure of it, not to fight. If Nathan hadn't stopped, they wouldn't have needed to fight anyone. Just a tragic vehicle rollover on a dark highway. Rain, a curve, a guardrail. Marcus behind the wheel. Victoria, restrained, eliminated cleanly in a way that would take forensics a week to unpick if anyone looked closely enough. The carelessness wasn't carelessness. They just hadn't planned for a variable. He turned the glass of water around in his hands. In his old life, he'd have already been on the phone. Already running traces, pulling threads, putting pieces together with people who knew how to put pieces together. In his old life, this was the beginning of an operation, not a random Saturday night. He set the glass down. His phone was on the counter. There was a name in his contacts he hadn't called in 3 years. A man named Carver, who worked in a space between agencies that didn't have an official name and preferred it that way. Carver had called him twice in the first year after Nathan left the Navy, both times with the particular casualness of someone pretending not to be making a professional inquiry. Nathan hadn't called back. Either time. He looked at the phone, looked at the hallway that led to the spare room, looked at the ceiling above which Emma was sleeping. He left the phone on the counter and went to bed. But he didn't sleep. He lay in the dark and watched the rain light move on the ceiling and ran the numbers on the situation the way he used to run numbers before an operation. What he knew, what he didn't, what the possibilities were, and how they ranked. Victoria had said she didn't know who she could trust. That meant the threat was internal, which meant it was organized, which meant whoever arranged last night wasn't done. One failed attempt wasn't an ending. It was a complication. Which meant Victoria Sterling was still in danger. Which meant as long as she was in his house, so was Emma. He got up at 4:30, gave up on sleep as a project, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. He was standing at the counter waiting for it when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Too heavy for Emma, moving too carefully for someone comfortable in the house. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway in the clothes she'd arrived in, her hair pulled back roughly, the butterfly closures on her face vivid against skin that hadn't slept much more than Nathan had. "Couldn't either," he said. It wasn't a question. "No." She crossed to the table and sat down. He pulled a second mug from the cabinet without asking. "Tell me about your company," he said, setting the coffee in front of her. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and the sky through the kitchen window was beginning to do something pale and uncertain at the eastern edge. "What do you want to know?" "Who benefits if you're gone?" She was quiet for a moment. The mug steamed. "That's a long list." "Give me the short version." She looked at him across the table. Something in her expression was working through a private calculation. Trust as a math problem, weighing variables. He'd seen it before in people who'd been operating in dangerous environments long enough to treat every new person as a potential threat until proven otherwise. He wondered briefly what that kind of life did to you over time. Then he thought about some of the things in his own history and decided the wondering was a little hypocritical. "My board of directors," she said finally. "3 of them in particular have been pushing for a structural reorganization for the last 8 months. What they call reorganization, what I call breaking the company into sellable pieces. You disagree. I built that company from a prototype I coded in a studio apartment when I was 22 years old, and I'm not selling it in pieces to a private equity firm so 3 men in their 60s can make back the money they lost on bad investments elsewhere." Her voice had an edge now. Not anger exactly, but something denser than that. Something that came from a long time of being underestimated and having to be right about everything twice. "So yes, we disagree." "Names?" She hesitated. "Victoria." He kept his voice even. "If someone in your company tried to have you killed last night, they're going to try again. I can't help you think through this if you're still deciding what to tell me." "I didn't ask for your help," she said, reflexively. Then a second later, "I'm sorry, that was..." "True," he said. "You didn't. But here we are." She looked at him for a moment. Then she told him the names. Richard Holt, CFO. 22 years at Sterling Technology, which meant he'd been there long enough to know where every body was buried and long enough to believe the company owed him something for staying. Dennis Varick, head of strategic development. Brilliant, ambitious, and had twice attempted to negotiate partnerships with firms Victoria had explicitly refused to engage. And Howard Crane, senior board member, early investor, old money from 3 generations of old money who had never quite gotten comfortable with the fact that someone like Victoria, young, a woman without a degree from the right school or a name from the right family, had turned his early investment into something worth 10 times what he'd imagined and refused to share the steering wheel. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Any of them have outside contacts? Security? Private contractors? People who move in spaces that aren't strictly legal?" Victoria looked at him carefully. "You mean like the men on the highway?" "Yes." Holt had a consulting relationship with a firm called Meridian Group. I looked into them last year when I found out about it. They're listed as a risk management company. Their client list isn't public. "Meridian," Nathan said. "You know them?" He picked up his coffee. "I've heard the name." He hadn't heard the name, but something in the specific combination of what she'd described, private contractors, risk management, the kind of firm that existed in the space between legal and not, matched a pattern he recognized from a different context, a different time, and his brain was already pulling at the thread of it in a way he didn't entirely want to encourage. Outside, a bird started up somewhere in the wet trees. The sky had committed to pale now, coming toward morning. Nathan could hear, faintly, Emma shifting in her room upstairs. The small sounds of a kid waking up slowly, not ready to be awake yet. "Here's what I know," Nathan said. "Whoever sent those men last night will find out by morning that it didn't work. They'll also find out that there's a witness. Possibly 2. He paused. "Your people, Holt, Varick, Crane, do they have your phone tracked?" Victoria went very still. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, looking at it with an expression that suggested this was a possibility she was both professionally prepared for and personally affronted by. She set it on the table face down like it might do something. "My assistant manages my device security," she said quietly. "Lena Park. She's been with me 4 years. And she would have access to location services." Victoria closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "Yes." Nathan looked at the phone. "When did you last use it?" "I haven't touched it since the accident." "Good." He stood up. "We need to move it away from this house before whoever is tracking it realizes where you've been all night." "How?" "I know someone in town who keeps odd hours," he said. He was already moving toward the counter where his own phone was, doing the quick calculation. Ray Munoz ran the bait shop on the edge of town and had insomnia so chronic he'd essentially given up on the concept of nighttime. "I'll have him take the phone in his truck out toward the county road and leave it somewhere plausible. Buys us a few hours before anyone looks too hard." Victoria stared at him. "What?" Nathan said. "You've been awake for 1 hour?" she said. "And you're already running a counter-surveillance operation." "I'm a mechanic," he said. "Who's making a phone call?" He picked up his own phone. "Go check on the cut. The kit's still on the table." She didn't move right away. She was looking at him with that expression again, the one she'd had on the highway when she'd climbed out of the overturned SUV and seen what he'd done and couldn't find a category for it, like she was revising something. Like whatever slot she'd put him in when she got in the truck last night was turning out to be the wrong shape. "Nathan." Her voice was quieter now. "What did you do before you were a mechanic?" He dialed Ray's number. It rang twice before the familiar graveled voice answered, already awake, because Ray was always already awake. "Ray, it's Nathan Cole. I need a favor." "Yeah, I know what time it is." He moved toward the hallway, lowering his voice. "I'll explain when I can. Right now, I just need you to drive somewhere and leave something and not ask me about it until next week." Ray grumbled, which was his way of agreeing. Nathan gave him the address. He came back to the kitchen. Victoria was still sitting at the table, both hands around the coffee mug, watching him. He sat down across from her. "I was in the Navy," he said. "Special operations, for 11 years. She nodded slowly, like this was a piece she'd already been holding and was now finding the right place for. "And then?" "And then Emma needed a father, more than the Navy needed me." He met her eyes. "So here I am." The kitchen was quiet. Morning was properly arriving now, thin and gray and real, and somewhere upstairs Nathan could hear the sound of small feet hitting the floor. Emma, awake, beginning the negotiation with gravity that started every day. In about 4 minutes, she was going to come downstairs and want breakfast and ask questions he wasn't sure how to answer yet. Victoria looked at her coffee. She looked like someone who had spent a long time being the most capable person in any room she walked into and was still figuring out what to do with the fact that this one had someone already in it. "Thank you," she said, simply. No performance in it. "Don't thank me yet," Nathan said. "We still have to figure out what comes next." Upstairs, Emma's door opened. Her feet on the stairs. The world contracting to something small and immediate and requiring breakfast. Nathan got up to start the eggs. Emma came downstairs with her hair doing something complicated on one side and her socks mismatched, one yellow, one with a small cactus print, and stopped at the bottom of the stairs when she saw Victoria still sitting at the kitchen table. She looked at Victoria, then at Nathan, who was cracking eggs into a pan, then back at Victoria. "You stayed," Emma said, not accusatory, just noting a fact. "I did," Victoria said. "I hope that's all right." Emma considered this with the gravity of someone being asked to ratify a treaty. Then she climbed into the chair across from Victoria and folded her arms on the table. "Are you hurt?" "A little." "Dad fixed you up?" "He did." Emma nodded slowly. "He's good at that. He fixed my arm when I broke it. Well, he drove me to the doctor, but he held my hand the whole time and didn't even look grossed out." She paused. "He looked a little grossed out." "I wasn't grossed out," Nathan said from the stove. "Your face was grossed out. Your words were normal, but your face—" "Emma, I'm just being accurate." She turned back to Victoria with the air of someone continuing an adult conversation. "Do you want eggs? He makes them okay." Not amazing, but okay. Victoria looked at Nathan. Nathan kept his eyes on the pan. Eggs sound good, Victoria said. He puts too much pepper in them, Emma said confidentially. But if you tell him not to, he gets this look, so it's easier to just eat them. I do not get a look. You're getting the look right now. Nathan put 3 plates on the table without comment. They ate breakfast together in a kitchen in Mill Haven, Oregon, while outside the morning arrived gray and still wet, and Nathan watched his daughter explain to a billionaire CEO the correct way to approach fractions by using the remaining toast as a visual aid, and he felt something strange and complicated move through him that he didn't examine too closely, because they had too much else to get through today. Dr. Reyes's clinic opened at 8. It was a small practice on the north end of town, the kind of place that had a rack of outdated magazines in the waiting room and a hand-lettered sign on the door asking patients to silence their phones, which Nathan had always respected. Doctor. Reyes herself was a compact woman in her mid-50s who had practiced in trauma centers in 2 different cities before deciding she wanted to wake up somewhere quiet, and had chosen Mill Haven with the same logic Nathan had. She looked at Victoria without asking how she'd gotten the cut above her eye, or why her ribs were taped, which was the quality Nathan had mentioned to Victoria the night before. 2 ribs cracked, 1 bruised. The cut would scar slightly, but not badly. Victoria listened to the diagnosis with the focused attention of someone converting medical information into a practical assessment, and thanked Dr. Reyes in a way that was genuine enough that the doctor seemed faintly surprised. Outside the clinic, standing on the sidewalk while Emma investigated a gumball machine through the window of the adjacent pharmacy, Victoria said, "She didn't ask." "She never does," Nathan said. "She figures if you wanted to tell her, you would." "Smart woman. She also has a good memory and bad people don't tend to come back. So there's some self-selection." He glanced at her. "How do you feel?" "Like I have 2 cracked ribs." "That's accurate." She looked down the street. Mill Haven at 8:30 on a Sunday morning was its own particular thing. A few people walking dogs, the diner open with its lights warm through the window, a man Nathan recognized as the postmaster sitting on a bench eating something from a paper bag. Nothing threatening, nothing that looked like anyone watching. But the car Ray had taken Victoria's phone in had been gone since 6 a.m., and whoever was tracking that signal was going to find it sitting outside a gas station off the county road and have questions. "We need to talk about what comes next," Victoria said. "I know. I have to go back. I can't just disappear. I have a company with 4,000 employees and a board meeting on Wednesday, and people who are going to start asking where I am in." She checked her wrist where there was no watch, because the watch had been lost on the highway. She looked at the bare wrist for a second with an expression Nathan recognized. The brief vertigo of reaching for something that used to be there. "People will already be asking." "We'll deal with that," he said, "but not yet." "Nathan, Victoria." He kept his voice quiet. Emma was still at the pharmacy window, not listening, but a man who'd spent 11 years in the business of not being overheard had calibrated habits. Whoever arranged last night is going to find out it failed. If they're tracking your phone, they already know you didn't go home. The longer you walk back into your normal life without understanding the full picture, the more exposed you are. She looked at him. Her jaw was set. Not anger, he was starting to understand, but the expression of someone whose default mode was to solve problems by moving faster than them, and who was currently being told to slow down. "So, what do you suggest?" "I know someone," he said. It came out more reluctantly than he intended. "A man named Carver. He works in the space between things. He can run a quiet trace on Meridian Group, who they are, who's hired them recently, whether there's a connection to anyone on your board." "And you trust this person?" Nathan thought about the 2 calls he hadn't returned, about Carver's voice on the voicemail. Neutral, unhurried, the voice of a man who never telegraphed what he was actually after. "I trust him to do what I ask, and not to do more than I ask. That's about as far as my trust goes with most people." Victoria seemed to consider this a reasonable framework. "Make the call." He looked at her. "There are conditions. If I reach out to Carver, people from my old world are going to know I'm involved. It opens a door I've kept closed for 6 years. And you're telling me this because you should know what this costs me before I agree to it, he said simply. So you understand I'm not doing it casually. She held his gaze for a moment. The morning light was thin and clear, the kind of light that didn't do anyone any favors. And in it, Victoria Sterling looked exactly like what she was. A very capable, very tired person who had narrowly survived something, and who was still standing up straight anyway because that was the only mode she knew. I understand, she said quietly. Emma came back from the pharmacy window with the energy of someone who had made a decision. Can I get a gumball? Nathan reached into his pocket. 1, 2, 1, 1.5. That's not how gumballs work, Emma. She took the quarter he handed her with a philosophical expression and went back to the machine. He made the call from the truck while Emma was inside the pharmacy actually buying the gumball, and Victoria waited on the sidewalk, facing the street. 3 rings. Then Carver's voice, the same as it had been 3 years ago, the same as it had probably been since the man was born, flat, level, carrying approximately nothing. Cole. You still have the same number, Nathan said. You finally called it. I need something. A pause. Not surprise. Carver didn't do surprise. More like the pause of someone setting down whatever they were holding and giving their full attention. Go ahead. Meridian Group, risk management, private contractors, client list not public. I need whatever's attached to them. Financials, corporate structure, recent contracts, and any connection to a man named Richard Holt, CFO at Sterling Technology. Sterling, a beat, as in Victoria Sterling. You follow business news. I follow everything, Nathan. You know that. Another pause, shorter. Is she alive? Nathan's eyes went to Victoria through the windshield. She was standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, watching a car go slowly past with the automatic attention of someone who had recalibrated her threat assessment in the last 12 hours. Yes. And you're involved. Reluctantly. Carver made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. How long has it been since you've been involved in anything? 6 years. And you're calling me. Do you want to discuss my life choices, or do you want to do the thing I'm asking you to do? Both, ideally, Carver said. But I'll start with the thing. Nathan heard the soft sound of keys, which meant Carver was already running something. The man operated at a speed that Nathan had always found either impressive or unnerving, depending on the day. Give me 4 hours. Stay where you are. And Nathan. What? She's worth protecting. Whatever you're thinking about walking back from, don't. Nathan didn't answer that. He ended the call. They couldn't stay at the house. That was the conclusion Nathan had arrived at somewhere between the clinic and the pharmacy. The phone Ray had moved would buy them time, but time had a ceiling, and a house with a known address was a liability once anyone started looking seriously. He needed somewhere to work through what Carver would send him, somewhere off the visible grid of his life, somewhere that Emma would be safe. He thought about it for the drive back to Aldermore Street and had the answer before they pulled into the driveway. His friend Dan Kelso owned 40 acres outside town, most of it timber, with a hunting cabin at the back of the property that he opened 4 times a year and otherwise left locked. Dan was currently in Phoenix visiting his daughter's family. Nathan had the spare key because he'd re-roofed the cabin 3 summers ago, and Dan had never asked for it back, which was the kind of casual trust that existed between men who'd been in the same town long enough and never given each other reason to regret it. He explained this to Victoria while she sat on the kitchen chair and watched him move through the house with a speed and efficiency that she was clearly still recalibrating to. He wasn't packing much. Changes of clothes for him and Emma, the first aid kit, the laptop he kept in the desk drawer for tax records, and the occasional video call with Mrs. Albright when Emma was sick and needed something during the school day. You're thinking about this like a field operation, Victoria said, force of habit. No. She shook her head. You're thinking about this like someone who never actually stopped thinking about it. You just stopped acting on it. He looked at her across the kitchen. She was perceptive in a way that went past intelligent and into something more specific. The perceptiveness of someone who had spent years reading rooms and reading people, because in her world, reading them wrong was expensive. Maybe, he said, I'm not criticizing it, she said. I'm... She stopped, and for a second something less composed moved across her face. I'm grateful for it. I just want you to know that I see it, what this is costing you. He folded a sweater of Emma's into the bag. Let's just get through today first. Emma appeared in the doorway of her room, watching him pack her bag with an expression of focused attention. She'd been quiet since the clinic, processing, which was what she did. She was 8 years old, but she processed things with a patience that sometimes made Nathan feel like he was the younger one. Are we going somewhere? She asked. Dan Kelso's cabin, for a couple days. She looked at Victoria. Is this because of last night? Nathan paused. He'd always believed in not lying to her. Not because it was simple or comfortable, but because she had radar for it, and also because she deserved not to be lied to. Yes, she nodded slowly. Are we in danger? I'm making sure we're not, he said, which was as honest as he could be. Emma thought about this. Can I bring my book? Yes. And the tomatoes? The ones on the porch that are almost ready? The tomatoes will be fine for 2 days. She seemed to weigh this, then accepted it and went back to her room to collect what she needed, which based on the sounds was primarily books and a stuffed animal she technically claimed was for babies, but had slept with since she was 3. Nathan didn't comment. Some things you just let be. The cabin was 40 minutes outside Millhaven, down a dirt road that turned to mud for the last mile and required Nathan to take it slowly enough that Emma fell asleep against Victoria's shoulder in the back seat, which seemed to surprise Victoria considerably. She sat very still, looking down at Emma's head with an expression Nathan caught in the rearview mirror that was so unguarded he looked away quickly, because it felt like seeing something he hadn't been meant to. He unlocked the cabin and got Emma inside and onto the old sofa with a blanket, and then he and Victoria sat at the small kitchen table while the coffee he'd found in Dan's cabinet brewed and Nathan opened his laptop. Walk me through your board structure, he said. Not the names. I have the names. The relationships. Who talks to who? Who's been in the room when decisions went sideways? Victoria started talking. She was precise and organized, which he'd expected, but what he hadn't expected was the texture of it. The way she described 3 years of gradually realizing that the company she'd built was being quietly maneuvered around her, not through anything dramatic, but through the accumulation of small exclusions, conversations that happened before meetings, decisions that arrived already made. It was patient and deliberate and professional, and it had taken her longer than she wanted to admit to name it for what it was. When did you start to understand what they were doing? Nathan asked. 8 months ago. Holt brought a restructuring proposal to the board that I hadn't seen before the meeting. That doesn't happen. I see everything before it goes to the board. Always. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. When I asked him about it afterward, he apologized and said it had been an administrative error. And I sat there in my own conference room and looked at him and thought, you've been with this company for 22 years and there has never been an administrative error. And I smiled and said, of course, no problem. Her jaw tightened. I should have moved on it then. Why didn't you? She looked at the table, then back up. Because I didn't have proof. And because I second-guessed myself. I thought about how it would look. A female CEO accusing 3 senior executives of conspiracy without evidence. She said it flatly, without self-pity, just naming the specific calculus she'd had to run. In my industry, in my position, you don't make that accusation without being certain, because if you're wrong, you don't get to be wrong twice. Nathan was quiet for a moment. And now you're certain. Someone tried to kill me on a highway last night, she said. Yes, now I'm certain. He turned back to the laptop. What does the research facility do? The one in your main campus? She looked at him. How did you know about the research facility? Sterling Technology's primary campus in Portland has a restricted access research wing that isn't on the public floor plan, he said. I looked it up this morning at the clinic while Dr. Reyes was taping your ribs. Your company's accessibility software division publishes papers from a research team whose institutional address doesn't match any of the public buildings on your campus. Victoria stared at him for a second. You looked that up in 20 minutes. I was curious. Most people would have Googled me and found my Forbes profile. I'm not most people. She seemed to accept this. The research wing is where we're developing the next generation platform. It's not public because it's not ready, and because there are 2 patents still in process, and because she stopped. Something shifted in her expression. Because if someone were trying to take the company apart, that wing is where the most valuable asset is. Nathan looked at her. How valuable? The platform we're building would replace the current accessibility interface standard for an estimated 60% of major enterprise software systems within 5 years. She said it without ego, just numbers. We've had acquisition offers that I've turned down. Significant ones. From who? 3 different firms. All of them connected, ultimately, to the same holding company if you follow the corporate structure far enough. Carver's going to find that holding company, Nathan said. He was already typing a follow-up text. What's the name of the law firm that filed the patents? She told him. He typed it. Nathan. Her voice was careful. Are you sure about this man, Carver? No, he said honestly, but I'm sure he's better than what we have right now, which is nothing. She seemed to find this an acceptable answer, which told him something about how she operated. She didn't need certainty. She needed reasonable odds and transparent reasoning. He could work with that. Carver called back in 3 hours, not 4. Nathan stepped outside onto the cabin's small porch while Emma sat at the kitchen table doing the fractions she'd brought with her because, as she explained to Victoria with great seriousness, math didn't stop just because you were in a cabin. Meridian Group, Carver said without preamble, registered in Delaware, operational headquarters in a city I won't name on an unsecured line. 12 employees on record, probably 4 times that in practice. They specialize in, and I'm reading their internal descriptor here, risk mitigation for high-stakes corporate transitions. Meaning they hurt people. Meaning they solve problems that other people's lawyers can't solve. Yes. Keys clicking in the background. Recent contracts include 3 corporate transition cases in the last 18 months. 2 of those involved executives who resigned unexpectedly. One involved a CEO who was killed in a home invasion that the police closed as a robbery gone wrong. A pause. The home was in a gated community with a security system that had been disabled for 43 minutes that evening. Nathan leaned against the porch railing. The timber stretched out in front of him, still and wet and smelling of pine and earth. And the connection to Holt. Wire transfers, indirect, 4 shells between Holt's personal account and a holding structure that funds Meridian's operational accounts. They're messy enough that someone built them in a hurry, which means Meridian wasn't the original plan. The original plan was something slower, probably legal. Someone accelerated the timeline. Why? Because Victoria Sterling started asking questions 8 months ago, and whoever is running this decided she was too close. Carver's voice didn't change pitch. It never did. The patents, Nathan. The research platform. There's an acquisition that's been structured and partially funded for 6 months through a holding company called Vela Capital. If Sterling Technologies' CEO is incapacitated or removed from leadership under circumstances that require emergency board action, Holt has the votes to approve an acquisition within 30 days under the emergency provisions in the company charter. Nathan was very still. Emergency provisions, designed for a scenario where the CEO is medically or legally unable to lead. A violent death works. A serious injury works. A criminal investigation would also work, incidentally, if someone were to introduce evidence of financial impropriety at the right moment. They have a backup. Several, I'd imagine. These people are careful, or they were until last night. A pause. How'd you take 3 of them? It was dark and wet, and they weren't expecting anyone. You were always better in bad conditions. Carver said it without inflection, which was as close as he came to a compliment. There's one more thing. Vela Capital's beneficial ownership traces to a man named Garrett Wynn. He's not a name you'll find in any news story about Sterling Technology. He's 4 steps removed from any visible connection. But 18 months ago, he was at the same private equity conference in Zurich as Dennis Varick. Varick and Wynn. The introduction would have been quiet, nothing on record. But if I can find the conference attendance list and cross-reference the hotel receipts from the same week, which I'm currently doing, I can build the chain. Another pause. Nathan, this is bigger than a corporate dispute. The platform Sterling is building. Wynn wants it, and he's not planning to use it the way she intended. There are government contracts attached to enterprise accessibility software at the scale she's describing. Defense applications, communication infrastructure. Nathan stood there on the porch for a moment, processing the specific weight of what Carver was describing. The distance between a cracked ribs woman in his spare room and a defense contractor scheme was not as far as it should have been, and the shortness of that distance made him feel something old and tired in his chest. Send me what you have. Secure channel. Already running it to the drop. Check it in 20. A pause. Nathan, you need to get her out of Oregon. Whatever safe ground you've built in that town, it's not enough for what this is. I know. I can arrange. Don't arrange anything yet, Nathan said. Let me think. He ended the call and stayed on the porch for another minute, watching the trees. Then he went back inside. Emma had finished her fractions, and she and Victoria were now in a conversation that appeared to be about the structural engineering of raised vegetable beds, with Emma explaining her tomato project in detail, and Victoria asking questions with what seemed like genuine interest. The image was strange enough that Nathan stopped in the doorway for a second, just watching. Victoria looked up and saw his expression. What did he find? She said. Emma looked at Nathan too, reading him the way she'd always been able to read him. Not the words, not even the expression, but whatever was underneath it, the thing he was carrying. I need to talk to Victoria for a minute, he said to Emma. Can you go check on the tomatoes? I know we didn't bring them, but I think there might be some behind the cabin. There aren't tomatoes in the woods, Dad. Check anyway. She gave him the look, but she got up, pulling on her cardigan, and went out the back door with the deliberate dignity of someone who understood they were being managed and was choosing to allow it. Nathan sat at the table. He laid out what Carver had told him methodically, without edits, because Victoria Sterling deserved the unedited version of her own situation. She listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she sat with it for a moment. Vela Capital, she said. I've seen that name. In a financing document about a year ago. I flagged it to Holt, and he told me it was a standard institutional investor with no conflicts. Her voice was very controlled. He told me. He was managing what you saw, Nathan said. For how long? It wasn't a question. At least 18 months, probably longer. She was quiet for a moment. Then she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, just for a second, just the one lapse, and then her hands came down, and her face was composed again. But he'd seen it, the specific exhaustion of someone who'd been betrayed by people she'd trusted and was doing the math on how many years of her professional life they'd been lying to her face. My assistant, she said. Lena, the device tracking, could be innocuous, he said. Standard security setup that someone else accessed. Don't cut her loose yet. Not until we know more. He paused. Who outside your company knows you best? Not professionally, personally. She thought about it. My lawyer, Claire Novak. She handled everything after my parents. She's been my attorney for 8 years and she's not connected to the company. No board access, no corporate role. Can you reach her without using any device connected to your usual accounts? Victoria looked at him. Then she looked at the cabin's landline on the wall, which had been there since Dan installed it during the Clinton administration and had probably never been on a network in its life. Does that work? She said. Dan pays the bill on a card he uses for nothing else, Nathan said. Old habit from his hunting club days. He doesn't want his wife to see what he spends on fishing trips. Victoria stood carefully. She was being deliberate about standing, managing the ribs, and crossed to the phone. She dialed from memory, which told Nathan something about Claire Novak's place in her life. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice, sleep thickened. Who the... Claire. It's Victoria. A pause. Then, with complete alertness, all the sleep gone. Where are you? I've had 3 calls from your office this morning. I'm safe. I need you to listen and not ask where I'm calling from. A pause. Someone tried to kill me last night. The silence on the other end had a texture to it. Tell me, Claire Novak said. Victoria told her. Not everything. Not Nathan, not the cabin, not the specific shape of the situation they were in, but enough. The highway, The men, the connection to the board. She was concise and clear, and Nathan listened with the part of him that was still, despite everything, professionally impressed by how she handled it. No panic, no emotional escalation, just the relevant information, efficiently delivered with a specific request at the end. I need you to go to the research wing, Victoria said. Today? The physical server backup in the sub-basement. Copy it and get it off-site. Don't tell anyone you're doing it. Don't use your regular car. And Claire, a pause. If Holt or Varick or Crane tries to reach me in the next 24 hours, you have no information. Claire said something Nathan couldn't hear. I know, Victoria said. I know it's Sunday. I'm asking anyway. When she hung up, she stood with her hand on the receiver for a moment. Nathan saw her shoulders, the way they rose and fell with a breath she was taking deliberately. She'll do it, Victoria said. Good. Nathan stood up. I need you to write down everything, every meeting, every document, every conversation you can remember that connects Holt, Varick, or Crane to either Meridian Group or Vela Capital. Dates, what was said, who was in the room. Everything. That's a lot to write down. I know. But right now your memory is evidence, and evidence needs to exist somewhere outside your head. She looked at him for a moment, and there was something in her expression that was different from the calculation he'd seen earlier. Something less managed. You're very calm, she said, for someone who said his fighting days were over. He found the yellow notepad in Dan's kitchen drawer. It had a cartoon fish on the cover, which was very Dan, and set it on the table in front of her with a pen. I'm calm because panicking doesn't help, he said. I've never been good at pretending I'm not what I am. I just stopped using it. He paused at the doorway. Start with the restructuring proposal, 8 months ago. Work forward. He went to get Emma, who was not finding any tomatoes behind the cabin, but had discovered a family of beetles under a piece of bark, and was observing them with the focused interest of a naturalist. Anything? He said, sitting down beside her on the log. Beetles, she said. 6 of them. I think it's a family. Could be. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is Victoria going to be okay? Nathan watched the beetles move in their small, deliberate way across the wet bark. I'm working on it. Is she nice? For real, not just because she's trying to be. He thought about this honestly. I think she is. I think she's been in situations for a long time where being nice wasn't the safest thing to be, so she got careful with it. But yes, for real. Emma seemed to find this satisfying. She picked a small piece of bark up, examined the underside, put it back carefully so the beetles weren't disturbed. Dad, she said. Yeah. Last night, on the road. Were you scared? He looked at her. The amber brown eyes, the crooked cardigan collar, the complete seriousness of the question. He thought about what the honest answer was. For about half a second, he said. Then I was just doing it. She nodded slowly. That makes sense, she said, with the tone of someone checking a hypothesis against the evidence. You don't really do scared very long. You do sometimes, he said, and that's okay. Different people carry it different ways. She leaned against his arm. He let her. They sat there for a minute on the log in the timber, listening to the wet trees drip around them, and Nathan felt the strange double weight of what the day was becoming. The pieces moving in the background, Carver's documents dropping into a secure channel somewhere, Claire Novak pulling a parking ticket from her desk drawer and looking for her rarely used car, Victoria at a kitchen table with a cartoon fish notepad building a legal architecture out of memory. And here, his daughter leaning against him, beetles going about their business. Come on, he said eventually. Let's go back in. Emma went ahead of him, stepping carefully over the muddy patches, and Nathan stayed a half step behind the way he always did, watching the path, watching the tree line, watching everything the way he couldn't quite stop himself from watching everything. He hadn't used what he was in 6 years. The truth Carver had said, and the truth he'd been sitting with all morning, was that he hadn't stopped being it. He went back inside. Victoria had filled 4 pages of the notepad. She didn't look up when he came in. Her handwriting was small and very neat, and she was writing with the speed of someone who'd been holding this inside a long time and was relieved, finally, to let it out. He made more coffee, sat across from her, and opened his laptop to the secure drop. Carver had sent 17 documents. He started reading. The 17 documents Carver sent weren't the kind that announced themselves. They were the quiet kind. Spreadsheets with columns that looked like routine corporate accounting until you followed the specific sequences Nathan had been trained to follow. Email threads that read like ordinary business correspondence until you noticed what wasn't said and why. Incorporation filings from 3 different states with the same registered agent name appearing in all of them like a thread sewn through separate pieces of fabric. Nathan read for 2 hours. He didn't move much. He drank the coffee that went cold beside him and didn't notice. Emma had settled on the cabin's old sofa with her book, turning pages at the steady rhythm of someone genuinely absorbed, occasionally making small sounds of reaction that she seemed unaware of. Victoria filled 3 more pages of the notepad, stopped, read back what she'd written, made corrections in the margin with the focused expression of someone building a legal argument. At some point, the light through the cabin's small windows shifted from the pale gray of morning to something that was attempting to be afternoon. "Nathan," Victoria said quietly. He looked up. She was watching him with an expression he was starting to recognize, the one that meant she'd arrived somewhere in her own thinking and was waiting to see if he was in the same place. "You've been on page 9 for 40 minutes. He looked at the screen. She was right. He hadn't moved. "There's a name that keeps appearing in the wire transfer documentation," he said. "Not Holt, not directly connected to Varick, someone else." He turned the laptop toward her. "Thomas Reel, General Counsel at Sterling Technology. He's been employed by your company for 3 years. Victoria went still. "Tom Reel has been my lawyer for..." "He's also on the board of a nonprofit that receives funding from a Vela Capital subsidiary. He's been on that board for 4 years, which means he was there before he came to work for you." Nathan kept his voice even. He knew what he was walking into when he took the job. The thing that crossed Victoria's face wasn't exactly shock. It was something more contained than shock. The expression of someone who has been anticipating bad news and discovers the bad news is worse than anticipated and has to rapidly recalibrate. She sat back in her chair and pressed one hand flat on the table and looked at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at Nathan. "Tom handled the security compliance review last year," she said, "for the research wing, which means he knows the layout. Which means he knows the layout." She set it back flat, the implications landing in sequence. "The access protocols, the server room locations, the emergency lockdown procedures. All of it." She was quiet. "The patent filings. Tom's department processed them. He would know the status and the timeline." Nathan turned the laptop back toward himself. "If the patents clear before they move on the company, the acquisition value changes significantly. They need to move before the patents are finalized." "When do the patents finalize?" "I don't know yet. Carver is working on it." He looked at her. "When's the board meeting?" "Wednesday." "It's Sunday." "Yes," she said. "I'm aware." He closed the laptop and sat back. The cabin was quiet except for Emma's occasional page turn and the distant sound of something moving in the timber outside. A deer, probably, or the wind picking up. He'd been in the habit for 6 years of letting silence be silence, not filling it with action before he understood what action was needed. It was a discipline that ran against his instincts, which wanted to move, to engage, to resolve. The discipline was what made the difference between a good outcome and a fast one. "There are 3 things we need," he said finally. "The documentation, what Carver is building and what you've been writing down, that needs to reach someone who can act on it legally and can't be compromised by your board. That's Claire's job, if she's the right person." "She is," Victoria said. "Second thing, the research wing. If Reel knows the layout and has been feeding information to Vela Capital, they know what's there, and they know they need it before Wednesday, which means someone may move on that facility before the board meeting. Not to take you out, that option failed, but to take the asset." Victoria's jaw tightened. "There are 12 researchers who work in that wing, support staff, security personnel." "I know, that's the problem." He looked at her. "Third thing, you need to be visible by tomorrow. Not here, not in hiding, but visible and functioning. Because the moment your board believes you're incapacitated or missing, Holt can invoke those emergency provisions and the timeline compresses to hours instead of days." She absorbed this without argument because it was true and she knew it was true. "So I have to walk back in." "You have to walk back in smart," he said. With the documentation secured, with the research wing protected, and with someone between you and whatever comes next. She looked at him across the table. You. He didn't answer right away. Nathan. I need you to understand something, he said. I have a daughter sleeping on that couch. She is the reason I left the life I had, and she is the first consideration in everything I do. If I help you do what needs to be done in the next 48 hours, I need to know she's somewhere safe. Not here, not with me. Somewhere these people can't find her, and where she doesn't know what's happening. Victoria looked at Emma. At the yellow cardigan draped over the arm of the sofa, the book held up in small hands, the complete absorption of a child in a story. Where? Mrs. Albright, he said. My neighbor. She has no connection to anything related to you or me beyond being Emma's occasional babysitter. Her sister is visiting from Portland. 2 women in a house with no professional connection to anyone. That's as off-grid as it gets. Will Emma go? He thought about it honestly. She won't like it, but she trusts me to tell her the truth, and the truth is I need her somewhere safe. She'll go. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You're very precise about how she works, she said. Most people aren't that precise about their kids. She's the most important thing I've ever been responsible for, Nathan said. Precision seems warranted. Something moved across Victoria's face, not quite the expression she'd worn looking at the Coast photograph, but in the same family. Okay, she said. What do we need to do first? He woke Emma at 3 in the afternoon, gently, with the directness he'd always used with her when the thing he had to say wasn't something she was going to like. She sat up on the sofa, blinking, her book fallen shut beside her, and looked at him with the immediately focused attention she had when she sensed something serious. I need to take you to Mrs. Albright's, he said. Tonight. She was quiet for a second. For how long? A day, maybe 2. Because of Victoria. Yes. Emma looked past him to where Victoria was standing in the kitchen doorway with a glass of water and the expression of someone trying not to look like they were listening while obviously listening. Emma looked back at Nathan. Is it dangerous? She asked. He held her gaze. I don't know exactly what the next 48 hours are going to look like. That's the honest answer. So I'd rather you be at Mrs. Albright's where it's definitely safe than here where I'm not sure. She processed this. He watched her do it. Could almost see the steps of it, the weighing, the cross-referencing against everything she knew about how her father operated. You're going to help her, Emma said. Not a question. Yes. Because someone might hurt her if you don't. Yes. Another pause. She looked at Victoria again, this time with a frankness that Victoria seemed to feel because she straightened slightly, like being assessed by a more consequential audience than she was used to. She doesn't have anyone else, does she? Emma said. It wasn't really aimed at Nathan. It was more like a thing she was noting for herself, an observation about the shape of a person's life. She has people, Nathan said carefully. But right now, in this specific situation, she needs you, Emma said. She pulled her cardigan off the arm of the sofa and put it on with the deliberate focus of someone who has made a decision and is moving on. Okay, I'll go to Mrs. Albright's. Nathan let out a breath he hadn't been aware of holding. Thank you. You have to call me every night. Every night. And you have to come back. She said it simply, without drama, looking at him directly. The way she said things when she meant them most completely. You always come back. That's the deal. He reached over and fixed her collar, which had gone crooked when she put the cardigan on. That's always been the deal, he said. From the kitchen doorway, Victoria said nothing. But when Nathan glanced over, she had turned away and was looking at the wall with the particular stillness of someone holding something together. He drove Emma to Mrs. Albright's at 5 o'clock. He didn't tell Mrs. Albright much, just that he had a family situation that required him to be out of town for a day or 2, and asked if Emma could stay. Mrs. Albright was 71 and had raised 4 children and had the specific unflappable quality of someone who had seen enough of life's disruptions to know that most of them resolved eventually, and that the best response in the meantime was to make sure the child ate properly. Of course, she said, already widening the door. Patricia is here anyway. Emma, do you like canasta? I don't know what that is, Emma said. Then you're about to have a skill, Mrs. Albright said. Emma went in. She turned at the door and looked back at Nathan standing on the porch with the truck running behind him. She didn't say anything, just looked at him for a second with those amber brown eyes, and then the door closed and she was inside, safe. And he stood there for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went back to the truck. Victoria was in the passenger seat. She'd been quiet for the drive, watching the town go past the window with the attention of someone memorizing it or finding it foreign, or both. "She'll be okay," Victoria said when he got in. "I know." "You're still worried." "I'm always worried," he said. "I've been worried since she was born. I'll be worried until one of us is dead, and at that point I'll presumably have other concerns." He started the truck. "It doesn't stop me from functioning. I've just learned to carry it." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, "What was her mother like?" He hadn't expected the question. He drove for a minute before answering it. "Stubborn. Smarter than she let people know at first, because she'd figured out early that men paid more attention when they thought they were the smart one in the room. She was a nurse. ER." He paused. She had no patience for nonsense, but she had infinite patience for people who were genuinely struggling. She could tell the difference instantly. Emma got that from her. "How did she—" Victoria stopped. "You don't have to tell me." "Car accident. Black ice on a bridge in January. She was coming home from a night shift." He kept his voice flat. It wasn't a performance of composure. It was just the shape the story had taken on over 6 years of telling it, or rather 6 years of mostly not telling it. Emma was 14 months old. She doesn't remember her. "But she looks like her. Every day," he said. The road back to the cabin was dark by the time they turned onto it, the trees pressing close, the headlights picking out the mud and the ruts. Victoria sat with her hands in her lap and said nothing more, and Nathan drove. And the silence between them was the kind that happens when two people have exchanged something real and don't want to immediately paper over it with more words. Well, back at the cabin, they worked. Carver called at 7 with the patent timeline. The filings were scheduled to finalize Thursday morning, which meant whoever was moving on Sterling technology needed to do it before then. Wednesday's board meeting was not a coincidence. Wednesday's board meeting was the mechanism. "They're going to do it in 2 stages, Carver said. "The board meeting is stage 2. Stage 1 is acquiring the research data, enough of it to make the acquisition viable even if the patents fail or if Victoria returns and contests the emergency provisions. They need a copy of what's in that server room." "When?" Nathan asked. "My estimate is tonight or tomorrow night. They've already lost their primary play. They're going to move fast before anything else falls apart." Nathan looked at Victoria across the table. She'd heard enough of the one-sided conversation to follow the shape of it. "We need to get to the facility," she said the moment he ended the call. "Yes." "The research wing has its own security system. I can access it remotely. There's an emergency CEO override built into the architecture. Tom Reel knows it exists but doesn't have the code." She was already calculating. If I lock down the server room remotely, even Reel can't get someone in without physically breaching the security hardware." "Which takes time and makes noise," Nathan said. "Exactly what they don't want." "But the researchers," her voice changed on the word. "If someone is going in there, the people working the Sunday late shift, how many?" 4, maybe 5 on a weekend night. Dr. Singh usually works Sundays. 2 technicians. She pressed her fingers against the table. "I can't lock them in there with someone." "Then we go," Nathan said. He was already standing, pulling his jacket from the chair. "You do the remote lockdown on the server room, and we go in person. That's a 3-hour drive to Portland. 2.5 if I drive." She stood too, managing the ribs with the practiced care she'd developed over the last 12 hours. "Nathan, these people will send professionals this time, not the 3 from the highway." "I know. That doesn't seem to concern you." "It concerns me," he said. "I just don't have a better option." He found his phone, sent Carver a text. "Portland. Sterling Tech Research Wing. Tonight. I need eyes on the building. Carver can get us camera access to the exterior before we go in. We'll know what's there." Victoria was watching him with the expression she'd had on the highway, the one that was still recalibrating, still finding new things that didn't fit the category she'd built for him. You keep saying we. You need to be there. CEO override. And also, he stopped. Also what? Also the researchers trust you. If something goes wrong inside, people follow someone they know. She held his gaze. Then she picked up the cartoon fish notepad in her jacket and said, I need to make one call before we go. Claire needs to know we're moving. Make it from the landline. Keep it under 90 seconds. She looked at him. You're serious. 90 seconds is hard to pin. Longer than that, they can work with. She crossed to the landline and dialed. He went to the small back room where Dan kept his hunting equipment and found what he was hoping to find, a locked cabinet that turned out to have a key on the same ring as the cabin key, which was either carelessness or implicit permission. Inside were 2 rifles, a handgun he didn't recognize, and a box of shells for each. He took the handgun. He checked it, checked the load, and put it in the back of his waistband under his jacket, with the muscle memory ease of someone for whom this was a familiar weight. He stood there for a second in the small room, hands at his sides. He told a lot of people over the years that he was done with this. He told Briggs. He told the 2 SEAL teammates who'd called him in the first year and gotten progressively less on the other end of the phone until they stopped calling. He told himself, most consistently of all, in the specific daily negotiation of a life that was supposed to be about Emma and the garage, and nothing more consequential than whether he put too much pepper in the eggs. He wasn't sure he'd been wrong to say it. He wasn't sure any of those statements had been a lie. He'd meant them when he said them. He also understood, standing in a hunting cabin in Oregon timber with a loaded firearm, that meaning something and being free of it were not the same thing. He went back to the kitchen. Victoria was off the phone. She was standing straight, jacket on, the notepad tucked under one arm. She'd done something with her hair, pulled it back tighter, cleaner, the bruised efficiency of it all back in place. She looked less like someone who had survived a crash, and more like someone who was about to do something difficult on purpose. Claire has the documentation, she said. She's making copies and sending them to 3 separate people with instructions to file with the SEC and the state attorney's office if she doesn't hear from me by Thursday morning. Good. He crossed to the kitchen counter, found a piece of paper, and wrote Mrs. Albright's address and phone number on it. If anything happens to me tonight, call that number. Ask for Emma Cole. Tell her... He stopped. Victoria looked at the paper and then at him, very directly. Nothing is going to happen to you. Write it down anyway. She took the paper. She folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. Then she said, What were you going to tell me to say to her? He pulled his jacket on. That I kept the deal. They drove to Portland in 2 hours and 20 minutes, which was as close to the 2.5 he'd promised as the road conditions allowed. Victoria spent the first hour on logistics, a secondary phone she'd found in the cabin, a prepaid thing Dan Kelso apparently kept for hunting trips, on which she was able to access the research wing's security system through a protocol that existed outside her regular accounts. Nathan listened to her talk through the lockdown procedure with the attention of someone memorizing a building through someone else's description, which was exactly what he was doing. The research wing was on the northeast corner of the Sterling Technology campus in Portland, a building within a building, with its own access control and its own power circuit that ran independent of the main campus grid. 4 entry points, 1 loading dock on the east side. Security desk at the main entrance with 2 guards on nights and weekends. Camera coverage that was comprehensive on the exterior and partial on the interior, with 1 blind spot in the sub-basement corridor that Victoria mentioned with the tone of someone who'd flagged it as a problem twice and been told it was a low priority. Tom Reel was in the meeting where I raised the blind spot, she said. Of course he was. He said the camera placement was constrained by the structural columns, which is true incidentally. It's just not the whole story. Carver texted at 11:15 when they were 40 minutes out. 4 individuals entered campus through the east service entrance 12 minutes ago. 2 are carrying equipment cases. Building security has been notified of a scheduled maintenance window by someone with authorization codes from the corporate facilities account. A pause, then, Tom Reel signed the maintenance request at 6 p.m. today. Nathan showed Victoria the text. She read it once, set the phone face down on her knee. He's been planning this since this morning, she said. Since he found out the highway operation failed, Nathan said, he doesn't have days. He has hours. What are 4 men with equipment cases doing in my research wing? Copying the servers, fast, portable, targeted. They know exactly what they want. He kept his eyes on the road. They have maybe 3 hours before the shift changes and new security comes on who might not recognize the maintenance window authorization. They're going to be fast, and they're going to be clean, and they're going to be gone before anyone looks twice. Unless we get there first. Unless we get there first, he said. He drove. The Sterling Technology campus sat on 12 acres in the northeast of the city, glass and concrete, and the particular aggressively modern architecture of companies that wanted their buildings to make a statement about the future. At 11:40 on a Sunday night, it was mostly dark. The main campus lit only by the exterior lighting and the glow from the research wing's windows, which burned steadily because research didn't follow business hours. Nathan parked 4 blocks away. He sat for a moment and looked at the building. "The remote lockdown," he said. "When can you trigger it?" "Anytime. Once I trigger it, the server room goes to emergency protocols. Biometric entry only, internal cameras switch to continuous recording, and an alert goes to the campus security director." She paused. "Who I don't trust." "So the alert is a problem." "The alert is a problem. Can you trigger the lockdown without the alert?" She was quiet for a moment, working through it. "The alert is tied to the emergency protocol. I can delay it. There's a 10-minute window before the notification sends, designed for false alarms." 10 minutes, he said. "Trigger it when I tell you. That gives me 10 minutes to get to the server room before security starts moving. And the 4 men who are already in there." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. She'd been holding herself very carefully for the last 2 hours, the ribs requiring a specific kind of still management that he'd noticed her maintaining without complaint. Now she shifted in her seat to face him more fully, and the wince she suppressed told him the movement cost her. "Nathan, 4 professional operatives." "Yes." "You have 1 firearm and cracked ribs backup." "Your ribs are staying in the car." "Absolutely not." "Victoria." He kept his voice level. "You can do more from out here than in there. You control the lockdown. You have the documentation Claire is holding. If I go in and don't come back out, you call the police, you call Carver's number, and you get as far from this building as you can." He paused. "You are not disposable. That's not what this is. But you are more valuable out here than you are in there, and I need you to understand that." She held his gaze. He could see the argument in her. The instinct toward the same forward momentum she used to run a company, the refusal to be sidelined, the particular frustration of someone who solved everything themselves having to sit outside while someone else went in. 10 minutes, she said finally. "If you're not out in 15, I'm calling everyone." 12, he said. "Give me 12. 11. He looked at her. "I'm not good at waiting," she said. 11 is my compromise." He almost smiled. "Fine. 11. He got out of the car. The night was cold and clear, Portland November cold, the kind that had edges to it. He moved along the block away from the streetlights, staying in the shadows of parked cars and building overhangs, the old calibration returning the way it always did. The way he'd explained it to Emma, the half-second of something that might be fear, and then just the work of it. He went in through the loading dock. The lock was standard commercial, the kind that yielded to a specific technique he'd learned in a training context he wasn't supposed to reference. The dock was empty. 2 large service carts sat against one wall. A freight elevator, currently on the floor above. He took the stairs. The sub-basement was 2 floors down. He heard them before he saw them. The low technical murmur of people working efficiently, a voice giving quiet instructions. The specific sound of equipment being connected that had a different texture than any other kind of work. He came around the structural column at the base of the stairs and saw the sub-basement corridor stretched out before him, and at the far end, the server room door standing open. 4 men. The equipment cases open on the floor, running cables to a portable drive array. 1 stationed at the door as a watch. The other 3 inside, working with the focused speed of people on a clock. Nathan looked at the layout. The blind spot Victoria had mentioned was real. The camera in the corner was angled to cover the server room entrance and the far end of the corridor, leaving a dead zone of about 15 feet along the left wall where he was currently standing. He pulled out his phone and texted Victoria 1 word: "Now." The server room door, which had been standing open, made a sound like a deep bolt engaging. All four men heard it. The three inside turned. The one at the door turned. They heard it, but they didn't understand it yet. Nathan had about 4 seconds before understanding arrived. He moved. What followed was not clean. It was not the fluid choreography of action sequences that made violence look effortless. It was fast and ugly and painful in several directions, and at one point Nathan took an elbow to the jaw that made his vision white out briefly, and he operated through the white in a way that was entirely muscle, no thought, just the deep grammar of what 11 years had written into his body. The man at the door went down first. The second came through the server room doorway, and Nathan was already moving inside his reach, and the second followed the first. The third was faster and had more training than the first two, and Nathan knew it within the opening seconds. Knew it from the way he adjusted, recalculated, gave ground deliberately rather than being pushed back. And this one took longer and hurt more, and at one point Nathan had his back against the server rack with the man's forearm across his throat and had to do something with his left knee that was structurally ungenerous. The third man went down. The fourth, the one who'd been running the equipment, was not a fighter. He was a technician. Nathan could see it the moment the man raised his hands and stepped back, because it was the gesture of someone whose job was information and not physical confrontation, and who knew exactly how this particular moment was going to go. "The driver, Ray," Nathan said. His voice came out roughly. The elbow to the jaw had done something he'd feel tomorrow. "Disconnect it." The technician looked at him for a second. Then he crossed to the array and disconnected it. "Hands on the wall." He did. Nathan had his phone out, texting Carver. "Sub-basement. Need pickup. 4 individuals for delivery to people you trust." He leaned against the server rack and breathed and let the adrenaline do its slow exit from his bloodstream, which always felt, on the other side, like something draining out of a tank. His phone rang. Victoria. "I can see the exterior camera," she said the moment he picked up. "The loading dock door is still closed. Are you—" "I'm fine," he said. 11 minutes? A pause. 11 minutes and 43 seconds. "I was close." "Are you actually fine? Or are you saying that?" He checked himself with the habitual practicality of someone who'd done this before. Jaw, ribs, left knee, a cut on his right hand from something he couldn't identify in the moment. "Operational," he said. "That's not what I asked. I'll tell you in the car." He heard her breathe, then, "Okay." He looked at the server room to the humming racks, the portable drive array sitting disconnected on the floor, the cables the technician had laid like a half-finished sentence. The research data was still here. The patents were still intact. Wednesday was still 3 days away, and they had documentation, and Claire Novak had copies of everything, and a man named Carver, who moved in spaces Nathan had tried to leave, was already making calls that would ensure the 4 men in the sub-basement had very long conversations with people who were very interested in Meridian Group and Vela Capital, and a man named Garrett Wynn, who had been 4 steps removed from everything until he wasn't. Nathan Cole leaned against the server rack in the sub-basement of the Sterling Technology Research Wing, with his jaw aching and his right hand bleeding on the floor, and he thought about Emma at Mrs. Albright's learning canasta, and he thought about a deal he'd made that he was still, somehow, keeping. Then he pushed off the rack and went back up the stairs to tell Victoria it was over. Victoria was outside the loading dock when he came through the door. She'd said she would stay in the car. She hadn't stayed in the car. She was standing 10 feet from the dock entrance with the prepaid phone in her hand and the cold Portland night around her. And when she saw him come through the door, she let out a breath that had clearly been held for the last several minutes and didn't say anything about the fact that she'd gotten out of the car. He didn't say anything about it either. "It's done," he said. She looked at him. The jaw, the hand, the general condition of someone who had just done something physically costly. She didn't ask again if he was fine because she could see the answer with her own eyes, and she was too intelligent to pretend otherwise. "The data is still in there," he said. "Carver is sending people to take custody of the 4 in the sub-basement. I need you to call the security director regardless of whether you trust him. You need this on record, officially, tonight, because if it goes unrecorded, they'll find a way to clean it up." "Already done," she said. "I called him 90 seconds after you went in." He looked at her. "I was sitting in the car," she said. "I wasn't going to not do the things I could do." She held up the phone. I also called Claire. She's been awake. The documentation goes to the SEC tomorrow morning, first thing. She has everything. The wire transfers, the Vela Capital structure, Reels maintenance request, all of it. A pause. Tom called me 20 minutes ago. My old number, which is still at the gas station off the county road on Ray Muno's truck. So he thinks I've been there for the past 14 hours. Nathan stood in the cold and looked at her. The cut above her eye was visible even in the low light, the butterfly closures dark against her skin. She had her arms crossed over her ribs, which he'd learned was her posture when they were hurting, and she didn't want to say so, and she was standing in a parking lot behind a building someone had just tried to rob, and she looked, not fine, not composed in any easy way, but present. Fully, stubbornly, consequentially present. "You called the security director," he said. 90 seconds in. "Oh, that was quick?" "I've been running a company since I was 22, she said. "I know how to make a phone call under pressure." He almost smiled. His jaw made that slightly more complicated than usual. "Let's get out of here." Datik. They drove back to Millhaven through the middle of the night, the highway dark and clear, the heater working and the radio off. Nathan drove, and Victoria sat with her head tilted back against the headrest. Not sleeping, but resting in the way someone does when they've been operating on pure adrenaline for 36 hours. And the adrenaline is finally, cautiously, beginning to recede. Somewhere around the midpoint of the drive, she said, "Richard Holt called the board meeting personally. 3 months ago, he was the one who advocated most strongly for my leadership in a public statement about the company's direction." She said it to the ceiling, not to him. He said in the statement that my vision was the company's most valuable asset. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. People say things. I believed him. That's the part I keep coming back to. She turned her head to look at the window. I'm not naive. I've been in business long enough to know that people's interests and their stated positions don't always align, but I believed him. A pause. I think I wanted to. I'd worked with him for so long, and I wanted to believe I knew who he was. That's not weakness, Nathan said. I know, it just feels like it. It feels like it because you're running the tape backward and seeing all the things you could have caught, he said. That's not how betrayal actually works. It works because people are convincing. If they weren't convincing, they couldn't do it. He drove for a moment. The question isn't why you believed him. The question is what you do with the information now that you have it. She was quiet for a while. Then, what did you do? When you found out what your last mission cost you? He hadn't expected her to circle back to that. He kept his eyes forward and thought about how to answer it honestly. I stopped, he said. I pulled back. I built something smaller that I could see the edges of and know that the edges were safe. He paused. I'm not saying that was the right answer. I think some of it was right, and some of it was... I think I used Emma as a reason to stop being afraid of other things. Like what? Like being the person I actually was, he said. It came out more plainly than he'd expected, without the defenses he usually kept around that particular truth. I knew what I was capable of. I knew the specific shape of it, and I wasn't sure what kind of man uses that, and also reads bedtime stories and makes eggs in the morning. He glanced at her briefly. Turns out you can be both. I just didn't want to test it. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. And now? Now I think maybe the problem was never being both, he said. The problem was thinking I had to be one or the other, like the two things couldn't exist in the same person at the same time. She was quiet. The highway ran ahead of them, empty and lit, and the night was the kind of deep and actual dark that only exists far enough from cities. Emma knew, Victoria said eventually. On the sofa in the cabin. She said you don't stay scared very long. She's smarter than me. She's a lot of things, Victoria said, and the warmth in her voice when she said it was the most unguarded he'd heard her. She's going to be someone remarkable. She already is, Nathan said. I'm just trying not to mess it up. The fallout came quickly once it started. By Monday morning, the SEC filing Claire Novak had prepared was in motion. By Monday afternoon, Richard Holt had retained a criminal defense attorney, which told the legal world everything it needed to know about his intentions. Dennis Varick stopped returning calls from Sterling Technologies' PR department, which told the same story. Howard Crane issued a statement through his personal publicist expressing his full confidence in Victoria Sterling's leadership, which was the political equivalent of a man edging toward a fire exit. Tom Reel resigned before noon on Monday. No statement, no explanation. Just a two-sentence email to the board that Victoria read standing in the cabin kitchen at Nathan's laptop, and then she set the laptop down and stood looking at the wall for a moment. He sent it at 11:58, she said, 2 minutes before Carver's people would have arrived at his apartment. He knew it was coming, Nathan said. He's been smart the whole time, she said. I should have looked harder. Not grief in her voice exactly. More like the particular ache of recognizing that intelligence, in the wrong hands, is just another tool for harm. The 4 men from the sub-basement were in federal custody by Tuesday, processed through channels that Carver had access to and that Nathan didn't ask about in detail. 2 of them had been directly connected to the previous Meridian Group operations, including the one in the gated community with the disabled security system. That connection, once documented, changed the legal dimension of what had happened on Route 9 from a corporate crime into something that had a different name and different consequences. Garrett Wynn, the man 4 steps removed from everything, was named in SEC filings by Wednesday morning. Nathan read about it on his phone in the garage, his hands in the engine of the Honda Civic with the world's okayest mom bumper sticker, which had been waiting patiently for 3 days while the rest of his life went sideways. Garrett Wynn's name was attached to a holding structure that was attached to other names, and the cascade of it was going to take months and possibly years to fully resolve in courts and boardrooms and government offices Nathan would never see the inside of. The patents finalized on Thursday morning, as scheduled, as quiet and unremarkable as any bureaucratic process that happens to be the specific thing several powerful people tried to prevent. Nathan found out from a text Victoria sent at 8:17 a.m. It contained the patent confirmation number and nothing else. And then, 30 seconds later, still standing. He sent back, good. He picked Emma up from Mrs. Albright's on Wednesday afternoon. She'd learned canasta, which she explained to him at length on the drive home, covering the rules with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered they were surprisingly good at something. Mrs. Albright's sister Patricia had apparently been a formidable opponent, and Emma had beaten her twice, which Emma described with a modesty so transparent it was practically a boast. How was it? He asked. Really? She thought about it. Mrs. G. Albright makes good soup, she said. And Patricia told me about when she and Mrs. Albright were kids, and it was kind of amazing that old people used to also be kids. A pause. I missed you, though. I missed you, too. Is Victoria okay? She's okay. Did you keep the deal? He kept his eyes on the road, but he was smiling. Yeah, Em, I kept the deal. She settled back in her seat with the satisfaction of someone whose primary concern has been addressed. Can we have pizza tonight? Yes, he said. Tonight we can have pizza. She pumped her fist once, quietly, which was her version of a celebration. What? Victoria came to Millhaven 3 weeks later. She drove herself, in a different car than the one that had gone off Route 9, and she called ahead, which Nathan had not entirely expected. He'd half thought the version of events that involved his house and Dan Kelso's cabin and a borrowed handgun and a cartoon fish notepad would exist in a separate category from whatever Victoria Sterling's life returned to afterward. He'd thought maybe the space between their worlds would reassert itself as naturally as it had existed before the storm. She pulled up in front of the garage at 2 on a Thursday afternoon. Nathan was under the Jeep from the drainage ditch kid, who had gotten it into another ditch in a different location and seemed to be developing a pattern. He heard the car and rolled out and saw her standing by the bay door in a coat that was expensive but not the wrecked suit from the highway, her hair down, the scar above her eye faint and new. You didn't call ahead very far ahead, he said. I knew if I gave you too much time, you'd find a reason to be busy. He stood up, wiping his hands on the rag from his back pocket. She was looking at him with a directness that had the same quality it had always had. The intelligent assessment, the absence of performance, but also something less guarded in it. Or maybe the same guardedness with less of the reason for it. How are the ribs? He asked. Fully cooperating, she said. Finally. She looked at the garage, at the 3 cars in the bay, at the small office door that stood open, and through which, If you angled right, you could see the edge of the desk with the visible brushstrokes on one side. I have a proposition. I figured. I'm rebuilding the security structure for the company from the ground up. The breach wasn't just the men on the highway and the four in the sub-basement. It was the entire architecture, who had access to what, how decisions moved, where the vulnerabilities were. She said it with the precision she brought to everything, but also with something underneath it that was less professional than personal. I need someone to lead that, to build a real security operation that's independent enough from the board and the executive structure that it can't be compromised the same way again. Nathan looked at her. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you the job, she said. Head of corporate security for Sterling Technology. Your own team, built from people you select. Your own budget, accountable directly to me. Not to Holt's replacement, not to any board committee. To me. She paused. Portland is 3 hours from here. You could keep the house. Emma could keep her school. The commute is real, but it's manageable, and there's flexibility in how the role is structured because I'm the one structuring it. He looked at the garage, the Ford pickup with its regular Mr. Dempsey visits, the Jeep with its drainage ditch story, the smell of oil and rubber that had settled into his hands so thoroughly he'd stopped trying to get it out. It's not the same as going back, Victoria said. Her voice was careful now, not selling it, but explaining it, which was the difference. It's not what you left. You wouldn't be in the field. You'd be building something, a system, a structure, something that protects people and lasts past any single moment. Like what I did in the Navy. Like what you did without the parts that broke you, she said. I'm not asking you to be what you were before Emma. I'm asking you to be what you are now, which is someone who is very good at seeing threats and building defenses against them, and also a slight pause. Someone who checks on a child's fractions at a kitchen table and sits on a log in the woods and talks to her like she's a person worth talking to, honestly. Nathan was quiet. The afternoon was gray and cold, a November that was doing its job. Behind the office door, he could see the desk with Emma's fractions on the table where she'd left them that morning before school, which he'd looked at and made a mental note to help her with tonight. The job comes with a real salary, Victoria said. Not a mechanic's salary. I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm saying Emma's college gets handled. Whatever she wants to study and wherever she wants to go. That's part of the offer. He looked at Victoria sharply. It matters, she said simply. And you'd never ask for it, so I'm putting it in. He didn't know what to do with that exactly. It was the specific kind of generosity that made him want to deflect and also made deflecting feel wrong, because she'd offered it with a directness that made deflection seem like ingratitude and also, somehow, like cowardice. I need to talk to Emma, he said. Of course. She gets a vote, real one, not a courtesy one. I'd expect nothing less, Victoria said. And she almost smiled, the expression a little like the one that had been trying to make it the whole time she'd been at his kitchen table with cracked ribs and a cartoon fish notepad, the one that was now fully present, because the circumstances finally allowed it. You'd have to meet her again, Nathan said. Properly. I was hoping to, Victoria said. If that's all right. Emma gave her opinion in full that evening, sitting at the dinner table with pizza in front of her, and the focused expression she reserved for decisions she was taking seriously. Portland, she said. That's far. 3 hours, Nathan said. Could we visit sometimes? The job has flexibility, he said. We could figure it out. Emma looked at Victoria, who was sitting across the table with a slice of pizza she'd been eating with the care of someone not entirely accustomed to informal dinners, though she was adjusting. Would you actually be there? Emma asked her. Or would it be like when Dad used to work late at the garage and say he'd be home by 8 and it was actually 10? Emma, I'm asking an important question. Victoria looked at her steadily. I would actually be there. I don't promise things I don't intend to keep. Emma chewed thoughtfully. How do I know that? You don't yet, Victoria said. That's fair. I'd have to show you. A pause. I'm good at showing things when I say I will. Emma considered this. Then she turned to Nathan with the expression of someone who has arrived at a verdict. I think you should do it, she said. The job. Yeah? "You've been kind of restless," she said. Nathan looked at his daughter. "I've been restless? Dad, you reorganized the garage twice in 1 month, and you don't even like reorganizing." He opened his mouth to say something and then closed it, because she was not wrong. "Plus," Emma said, returning to her pizza, "Victoria needs someone who actually knows what they're doing, and the tomatoes will be fine while we figure out the commute." Victoria made a sound that was quiet, but was definitely a laugh, swiftly managed because of the ribs, which were almost entirely healed, but not entirely. Nathan looked at his daughter and then at Victoria and then at the table, at the pizza box and the mismatched plates, and the fractions worksheet Emma had left at the corner, at the ordinary accumulated presence of the life he'd built in this kitchen, in this house, in Millhaven, Oregon. He thought about what he'd told Victoria on the drive back from Portland, about using Emma as a reason to stop being afraid, about not knowing for a long time what kind of man could hold two different things at once, about the problem not being the two things, but the belief that they had to be separate. He looked at his daughter, who was 8 years old and beat Mrs. Albright's sister at canasta and had her mother's eyes and had more patience for truth than most adults Nathan had ever met. He thought about a woman who built a company from a prototype in a studio apartment and refused to sell it in pieces, and survived a rollover on a dark highway and sat in a hunting cabin with a cartoon fish notepad and wrote down 6 years of betrayal from memory with small, neat handwriting and asked no one to feel sorry for her. He thought about the version of himself that had packed his skills into a box and told himself the box was enough. It had been enough. For a while it had been exactly what Emma needed and what Nathan needed and what the years required. He didn't regret it. You don't get to regret the thing that kept your kids safe. But enough had a shelf life, and 6 years was a long time to pretend you were finished. "Okay," he said. Emma looked up. "Okay, yes?" "Okay, yes," he said. She pumped her fist under the table, the same quiet celebration as before, and Nathan saw Victoria notice it with an expression that had completely given up being composed and was just, for a second, exactly what it was. He gave notice on the garage at the end of the month. The drainage ditch Jeep kid was the one who took it hardest, unexpectedly, standing in the bay with his hands in his pockets, saying he guessed he'd have to find someone else to fix the stuff he broke, which Nathan told him would not be a problem because there were other good mechanics in Millhaven, and also, gently but directly, he might consider driving in a way that involved fewer ditches. Mr. Dempsey came in on his regular 4-month schedule, found out Nathan was leaving, and spent 45 minutes telling him about his own career change in 1987, which had involved leaving a furniture manufacturing job in Ohio for a lumber operation in Oregon, and how he'd been terrified the whole drive out, and everything had turned out fine. Nathan listened to all of it and thanked him and shook his hand and Mr. Dempsey's hand was dry and very firm in the way of men who had spent decades working with them. He kept the house on Aldermore Street for 3 more months, which was long enough for Emma to finish the school year at her school, and for the tomatoes to survive the winter because it turned out Emma had been right that they'd be fine. He drove to Portland 3 days a week to begin building what Victoria had described: the security architecture, the team, the systems that would make the work he'd done on a dark highway unnecessary by making it harder for anyone to get that far to begin with. It was different from what he'd done before. Slower, more procedural, more about paperwork and assessments and conversations with engineers and lawyers than about anything physical. He found, to his surprise, that he was good at the patience it required. He'd been good at patience for 6 years. It turned out patience was transferable. Emma adjusted, as she adjusted to most things, by observing carefully and making her own assessment and then committing to it. She started calling Victoria by her name around the 6th week, which Nathan noticed but didn't comment on. Victoria had given Emma her actual number, not an assistant's, which Emma accepted with the gravity of someone understanding the significance of the gesture. Some Sunday evenings, Victoria was at the house on Aldermore Street for dinner. She learned gradually that Nathan put too much pepper in the eggs, and that Emma's system for dinner conversation involved going around the table and each person naming one thing that had been difficult and one thing that hadn't been, which was a practice Emma had invented herself at age 6 and enforced with quiet consistency. The first time Victoria participated, she looked briefly uncertain, as if she were being asked to do something she hadn't been asked to do in a very long time, which was to name something honestly at a table with people who were going to hear it without judgment or agenda. Then she said that the difficult thing had been a board meeting where the new CFO had mispronounced a key financial term 3 times, and she'd spent 40 minutes not correcting him because she didn't want to embarrass him and then had to live with having not corrected him. And the not difficult thing was that the patents were now fully active and the platform had its first enterprise client. Emma had nodded with the seriousness of a person receiving important information. Then she'd said that her difficult thing was fractions. Still, because fractions were just consistently difficult. And her not difficult thing was that the beetle families she'd found at the cabin were probably fine because beetles were resilient. Nathan had said his difficult thing was adjusting to a commute after 6 years of walking to work. And his not difficult thing was this, right here, which was imprecise as an answer and also completely true. There is a version of this story where the point is that a man saved a woman and got rewarded for it. That's the simple version. It fits in a sentence. The more accurate version is messier and smaller and more ordinary in its specifics. A man who had spent 6 years convincing himself he was finished found out he was wrong. A woman who had spent years convincing herself she didn't need anyone found out that wasn't the same thing as not wanting anyone. A child who had grown up with only one parent learned, slowly and in the particular way children learn things, sideways through observation, through beetles and canasta and dinner table rituals, that family was something that could be built from people who found each other in the dark. None of them became different people. That's the part that matters. Nathan Cole did not stop being someone who checked exits when he walked into rooms or drove a little too fast on highways when he was thinking hard or put too much pepper in the eggs. Victoria Sterling did not stop working late or being impatient with meetings that could have been emails or holding her cards close until she'd decided a person had earned them. Emma did not stop having opinions. 412 at any given time, possibly more. They just stopped doing those things alone. The former SEAL who had been a mechanic and was now something in between, neither the soldier he was nor the man who'd tried to be invisible, found out that the greatest courage he'd used in his life wasn't the 90 seconds on a rainy highway or the sub-basement of a building in Portland. It was the smaller and more sustained courage of letting people in, of choosing, every day, to be present for the people who needed him, of deciding that keeping the deal, I'll come back, that's the deal, was worth whatever the coming back cost. He told Emma once, when she'd asked about being scared, you don't stay scared very long. The part he hadn't said because she was 8, and some things you understand later, was that the not staying scared wasn't the absence of fear. It was the choice you made on the other side of it. The choice to go in through the loading dock. The choice to roll out from under the car when you hear small sneakers on concrete. The choice to drive back toward a life that might have use for all the things you'd been trying to put down. On a Thursday afternoon in early spring, Nathan Cole drove back to Millhaven from Portland along Route 9, past the dark mile where the trees pressed close and there were no lights, past the guardrail that had been replaced sometime in the winter. New metal, bright against the old, marking a spot that looked like any other spot now, unless you knew what had happened there. He drove past it without stopping. Emma's school let out at 3:15. He was going to be 3 minutes late, which meant she'd be standing on the front steps with her backpack and her cardigan and her current opinion about whatever she'd learned that day, watching for his truck. He drove a little faster. He was, for the first time in a long time, exactly where he was supposed to be. Not the man he'd been, not the man he'd pretended to be in the years between, but the man he'd finally decided to become, carrying everything he was, putting none of it down. That was enough. That was, it turned out, everything.